Hello and welcome. I'm going to start a small series of videos where I describe my path to the Vulkan, the volcano of X-Plane. Basically 1150 has been released. I am not a person who runs after beta simulators because I simply don't have the time to do beta stuff. So I usually stay on a version of a simulator as long as it is in a pre-release phase, and when the final release, the official release comes out, in this case 1150, that's when I normally make my move. So in order to update X-Plane, I needed to do a couple of things. First of all, I cleaned up my current X-Plane installation. I had planned to organize things anyway. So, for example, sweep through all the plugins and identify what I call the base plugins and additional plugins, because there is a set of certain amounts of plugins which I use as base plugins, and they are always loaded. And what I can actually show you quickly is how that looks like. I use the JSGME, so the generic mod enabler, and I have here a mod called base plugins. That is a folder which is here, mods plugins, and in that mods plugins I have base plugins, X-Plane 11 resources plugins, and here you can see the shells of all the plugins that I want to be automatically activated normally. The way this modding works is that the actual plugin files, they are where they need to be in X-Plane resources plugins, but what I do here is that the plugin relevant files, which are these XPL files, these end up in the mod folder, and I can therefore turn on or off plugins by simply selecting them here and creating packages for either a number of plugins, like I do in this base plugins case, or for individual plugins, the gizmo, which I not always need, the ground handling, which doesn't work at the moment. That's why I extracted it from my base plugins, because it doesn't work. X-Texture Extractor, which also doesn't properly work in Vulkan, unfortunately, which is that is really a pity, because I used this a lot in the previous version of X-Plane. But until there is a solution, or I find a way of making them usable for me again, they are excluded, so that normally what I do, that I only load the base plugins. But because I was going to update X-Plane, I removed all of those, so I turned them all off, and I made a complete backup of my old 1141 X-Plane. I use this tool, for example, which is called FreeFileSync, and there I can take my source, and this is on an external drive, the destination, because I incrementally update the backup of X-Plane from time to time. A lot of the files are already there, so in order to not copy all of the stuff of X-Plane again and again, and then taking a long time to copy it over to an external drive, I use this tool because it compares what is on the external disk with what is on my X-Plane installation, and it comes up with a plan to what has to be deleted, because I'm mirroring, I'm creating an exact copy. What has to be deleted because it isn't in the original, what needs to be added because it isn't in the copy, and what has to be overwritten because it is both on both sides, but my original here, the F drive, is newer or changed against the external version of the file. And therefore it goes a bit quicker to get things copied over if you do it regularly. The initial copy I did actually do with a full copy and had to wait for a long time, because external drives are usually rather slow, and therefore it takes quite long to update or to back up a complete simulator folder. One of the reasons why I also took things out, also with the sceneries, they're not inside the explain folder, is to keep exactly this exercise as short as possible, because I don't want to go through gigabytes of sceneries and authors and things like that. So these are all residing somewhere else, usually on another disk also, to keep the simulator disk relatively well free. So don't put on huge amounts of not really needed files, because these can reside somewhere else. My aircraft reside on a different disk, and also my sceneries, at least the sceneries that I consider add-on sceneries, custom sceneries, they reside on another drive, and there they take, I guess, a couple of 100 gigabytes in the meantime. But the actual simulator disk, which is F here, is free. So that's just to give you an idea of how I work. You don't have to do it that complicated, but what you should definitely do is get yourself a drive and make a copy of your X-Plane installation whenever you do a major change to it. Because if something goes wrong, you don't want to start installing everything from scratch again, because that definitely takes longer than recovering your copy from another hard drive. All right. So yeah, just to show you, by the way, I have a similar, hang on, I need to stop this one. So I have a similar set of add-ons. I use these shortcuts here to start different versions of the mod enabler. And here are currently the aircraft that I have been working through. In 1141, so I brought in all the Airbuses, the Boeings, and some other aircraft on a neat basis. So whenever I wanted to do something with them, like the JetFlight 152, then I bring them in. But the thing is, these are all still 1141, and I haven't yet tested and checked if I have the latest version that is needed for 1150. Reality is, if you move to 1150, and especially if you want to turn on Vulkan, you need to make sure that you use the latest or the appropriate version of that aircraft. And that means you need to really check with every aircraft here, will it actually work in 1150, and especially will it work in Vulkan. There are chances that some of these don't, or at least not at the beginning. We shall see. Because 1150 have just been released, some of the add-on makers, they waited for this release, and then they're possibly giving us some updates and some patches then for their products. An example is ground handling from JAR Design. It does not work. It says it should work in Vulkan. It's a beta, it's sort of a pre-release thing, but the fact is it doesn't, unfortunately. So none of the ground handling vehicles show up, although I can call up the... So there is something that needs to be done, either by JAR, or maybe there's a way of fixing this. I haven't had time yet to check this out. I just did a quick test, what works, what doesn't work, and anything that I couldn't get to work quickly, I kind of moved out of my base plugins, and then I will address this at some point in time, when I have time. So that just gives you an idea of how I handle my simulation. If you wonder why I'm doing it so complicated in brackets, it's because I don't believe in tons of add-ons, tons of sceneries, and tons of plugins to load unnecessarily. Each and every add-on that you put in some shape or form, will eat resources. If it's at the initial loading time, which can be quite long in X-Plane, yeah, or if it is with a long aircraft list and plugins where you go to the menu and then almost at the bottom of the screen the list ends. A lot of these plugins, they do something while they're running, even if you don't use them. So you always need to check what kind of plugin is this. Some plugins connect to the outside world, and while they do so, it could mean that during the initialization phase you need to wait for it to, whatever it does, yeah, phoning home thing, kind of whatever. So I turn all of that off, and I only leave the ones that I basically need every time I start explain. So that's what this is all about. Right. Anyway, what you then have to do is, once you realize that 1150 is released and it shows up, you will say, yeah, please update my simulator. And what happens is it will download the latest version of the XPlane installer. That's actually in the XPlane folder. Here it is, okay? And I just quickly start it for you so that you see how this works. You can now decide whether you want to run XPlane, but if you want to add or remove default scenery, because there were certain editions of XPlane. There was I think in America only, and then there's the worldwide, and there are some initially, as far as I remember. So I think that you could turn off some of the areas if you don't need them. So for example, if you only fly in the US, I think that's what this is. I don't need it. I want to fly everywhere. And this is actually the point you update XPlane. It will be automatically triggered when you ask for an update. And there you see now the steps that it will do for you. Here you can turn on betas if you really want to go for beta versions. I don't. And then you get pick destination. That means you need to tell it pick destination. I think that's the XPlane installation. I'm surprised actually doesn't know where it, yeah, anyway. Check servers, then scan, and that's what happens now. It scans through all the files, and the more files you have in your installation folder, the longer this will take, because it will have to go through all of these and check what is there and what has been changed. And then it checks disk space, and when you say install, it replaces all the files that have changed, or it adds new files, or it partially deletes files because they're not needed anymore. Things like that. Okay. Right, so that's that, cancel installation. And once you're through, you could now start XPlane. And here comes now the bit. I wanted to use Vulkan. And I realized that I can't turn Vulkan on because my graphic driver, my NVIDIA driver, was old. I don't update NVIDIA drivers. If I have a driver that works well, it stays there. And my driver is 1.5 years or almost 2 years old, because it still works with all 3 simulators, by the way. So XPlane was the reason why I had to change this and actually update it because it needs the latest NVIDIA drivers in order to run Vulkan, which is understandable and okay. So I made a system, what's that called? A system, Wiederherstellungspunkt in German. I forgot now what the English term for that is. Windows allows you to define states of your operating system that you can then recover. It's something like system recovery point or something like that in English. Usually when you install something like a driver, normally there should be an automatic recovery point being put in. Sometimes that fails. I had that already. What you use those for? Imagine you install a new graphic driver, and that is not unheard of, and it happened to me already in the past. Suddenly your simulator doesn't work because that new driver has an issue that you didn't know about, and then suddenly your simulator wouldn't start. I had that with XPlane, I had that with Prepared on my other machine. And these recovery points actually allow you to very quickly jump back to the previous installation. You should create a recovery point very close before you do actually installation, because the longer you wait between creating the recovery point and the installation, the more things will be reverted if you actually want to go back. And that could mean that other installations go lost or certain other files get lost. So I did this recovery point, manual recovery point, almost before, just a second before I kind of installed the NVIDIA driver, and then the driver was installed and everything was okay and it works fine. So no need for it to recover. So yeah, if that all has worked, the first time you start your XPlane, and you can't see this now because it's always starting on the other screen. There we go. So when you start X-Plane after an update, the first thing you do is you go to your settings. Okay, I have multiple axes. Not sure why it's complaining about that. But you need to go to graphics. So there are two things that you can see with 1150. First of all, we have this anisotropic filtering, which is something for showing you textures, certain things. So if you read this here, increasing the sliders makes runways and flat surface sharper from low angles. This impacts your graphics card. So yeah, the higher you do this, it could actually have an impact on your performance and on your frames. Well, with my card, my 1080 Ti, I didn't see much of a difference in the frames, and also not that much of a difference in the way it displayed the textures. So I leave it up here. But more decisive is this here. If you want to use Vulkan, you need to turn it on, but then you need to restart the simulator. So before I do this, what I do is I say done, then I go here, I choose the Cessna, yeah, without engine started. Okay, let's, nope, that's not what I wanted to do. Again, I choose the Cessna, and then I pick a position here. And Munich, there is actually, this is not default scenery. I actually have quite a bit of stuff there. I have X-Europe V2, VFR objects from Munich, then autos of zoom level 16 and 18 in the area. So scenery-wise and the short final design Munich, this is extremely, yeah, it's probably the highest level of scenery complexity that I have in and around Munich. But for me, this is a good test. I use this also for my try and flies because I want to see how does an aircraft perform from a frame point of view when I have that high of resource settings and of graphic settings and so on, and of sceneries, complexities and things. So I confirm this here. Yeah, we use scattered clouds. Always turn on some clouds because clouds do cost frames. And if you want to kind of compare things, you should turn at least scattered clouds or broken clouds. Let me put on broken clouds because they do eat a few frames more normally. So yeah, midday, that's kind of fine. So let's start this here. And now we're waiting. This will take a slightly longer time to load because, as I say, there's a lot of stuff to load, autos and so on. Because this is the probably best worked out scenery I have in X-Plane. I did that myself. The only other really complex, well worked out scenery area are either the True Earth in America or the True Earth in Great Britain. So I start without Vulkan because I first wanted to have a look at what are the frames like when you run just the standard vanilla render engine that we also used to have in 1141, and what's the performance like with that. Now the Cessna is a very uncomplicated aircraft. It doesn't really eat much frames, if at all. There are differences if you, for example, call up anything that has displays, especially the 737, for example, of Lamina. There is a visible difference when you do that. And the other thing is the initial loading of sceneries and so on could take a bit longer. And yeah, I know I have a little issue that I need to correct here with the X-Europe V2. So here we have some clouds. And what we can see now is with the Cessna, everything turned off, clouds. We have in and around 50 frames. I'm not limiting frames. I do have no plugins whatsoever. And I only have the default aircraft that come with X-Plane. So it is almost vanilla X-Plane, not quite, because as you can see, Munich and the whole area around Munich is rather complex. Yeah. The higher you go, the less objects it has to render. It kind of scales down what it is actually rendering. Therefore, our frames go up the higher I go. Yeah, but the closer I get and the more objects it needs to bring into the rendering, the slower it partially gets. And it depends a little bit also where you are, and quite often what can happen is that these things will change when you turn. For example, we have 10 frames more. Why? Because basically the airport is finished here. Therefore, we get up to 75. But when I turn towards the airport, you can see that we lose 15, 20 frames. Because here we have now a lot of things that need to be rendered. The buildings, everything high definition, very high settings. You've seen that. Yeah, so that's normal. No surprise. Now, what we want to do is, very quickly, I turn Vulkan on, I say done, and I must now leave the simulator and restart it again. And I will do that right now. I always wait a little bit until it has stopped. Actually, sometimes X-Plane lingers a bit. That usually has to do with plugins. Some plugins kind of grab it a bit and keep it from stopping until they're done. So sometimes if you're too fast with restarting your X-Plane, you might actually end up with an error message because it says, oh, there's another X-Plane instance running. I can't allocate my UDP port and things like that. So let's resume last flight, because that's the Cessna in Munich. You might see then that the very first loading can take a bit longer because it's building some stuff. But once it has built the kind of temporary, whatever it is, render things and so on, you will realize that the loading will be faster. So usually the second loading should be a bit faster. Since I have started X-Plane a couple of times, what you see is now the faster. Although it doesn't feel like it, I know. So, we are waiting. We are waiting. Finished. Asynchronous loading. Done with preloading. We are again finished. Whoops, and preparing world. Preparing world is usually one of the last ones you see, and shortly after that the simulator should show. Yeah, eventually. Yes. Yes. There we go. Okay, understood. So, the first thing you see is that this initial view is, there are more frames. So we used to run on in and around 55, I think, to 58. After turning on Vulkan, there are a few frames more. Don't expect miracles. It's not that you turn on Vulkan and everything is double as fast as it was before. No, that's not the way this works. But you will see a certain percentage of improvement, and every frame that you get additionally helps. And especially if they, in the case of the Cessna, in such a complex area here, runs in their 60s without effort. And there is also a difference to before. My fans on the computer, they don't blow as much as they did just before. Because I realized that the CPU is used like with 20%. This is a simple aircraft, don't forget. And the graphic card, even with OBS uses almost more of my graphic card than The simulator, by the way, hides himself behind this desktop window manager. Don't ask me why, but it is basically the simulator that uses this. So my graphic card, although I have the highest settings, doesn't go much higher than 60-70%, and things are very quiet on my box. I have very loud fans on my water cooler, on my the CPU cooling, and yeah, it's unfortunate that it's such a loud one. I thought it would be a silent one, but you know how things are with stuff that you buy. Sometimes, yeah, the promises are greater than the reality. So in this case, I realize immediately if that box is under fire or not. And in this case, it's not. And that is, for me, is a discernible difference between non-Vulkan and 1141 and 1150 with Vulkan. Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, so let's quickly do this outside thingy. So, yes, sometimes we go down to the 55s and so on, but let's see where we end up. Yeah, so we end up in the 80s. Before that, we were in the 75s. So we're talking about 10%, maybe 12% improvement without me having done anything, just turned on that Vulkan engine. Yeah, things are very smooth. And not only that, when in 1140 and below, if I had 80 frames, if I managed to get to tweak everything and reduce it like that and got 80 frames, my box would be, the fans would make a racket. Yeah. I'm now at 87 and I hear almost nothing compared to what it would normally be. So for me, this is a huge, huge improvement. And I'm really, really happy. And it also means I don't need a 2080 Ti, and I also don't need a 3080 Ti, because my 1080 Ti, which is far less powerful than these new ones from NVIDIA, is still well capable of running X-Plane decently enough. Yeah, and quite frankly, for me, it doesn't have to be 100 and whatever. I'm not in a sports competition here. If I get a decent frame rate, and by the way, 35 is a decent frame rate for me, even still. I don't consider that I have to have a system that runs on 90 all the time. Another advantage that you might experience if you have a better graphic card, but you have 4K screens, I'm pretty sure with Vulkan it is far better running higher resolutions, which I can't and I don't want to. But I'm pretty sure in the cases where you run with 4K, you will definitely have advantages of using Vulkan compared. So if I get on my very simplistic setup, if I get huge 10-15% is a lot. Yeah, this is not small. Yeah, so I'm really, really, really happy with that. And it seems to be pretty stable. Now there's only one little snag at the moment, and that is not every add-on, not every aircraft, not every plugin. I'm not sure about sceneries, but when it comes to aircraft and custom aircraft and plugins, not everything works yet flawlessly or without problems. Many of them are, but many of them are not. So I want to end this video here, just giving you my first impression, but I'm planning to run all those base plugins, and I'm going to talk you through the base plugins in the next video. And I'm also planning over the course of the next couple of weeks, I'm going through all my add-ons step by step, check compatibility, check what needs to be done in order to run it in Vulkan in 1150. I also will check out the ones that are not yet capable of running under Vulkan. They may be running under 1150 with Vulkan turned off, but it could be that they don't. Example, ground handling by jar design seems to work when Vulkan is off, but does not work at the moment, although it's supposed to, when it's on. X-Texture extractor, unfortunately, in Vulkan, but also when I had Vulkan turned off, it doesn't find the one image that actually contains your displays. And in the case of some of these aircraft, I need to go 150, so I need a key, and I have to press this key 150 times to find the 150th image where I discovered there is actually my displays there, so that they can be displayed in these external windows. And the next time you start the same aircraft, it has forgotten about it. It's not able to find these anymore. There is supposed to be an automatic in there in version 2. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. So currently X-Texture extractor, and I find that a pity, but well, that's just reality. Maybe the developer finds a way of overcoming this behavior. At the moment, for me, X-Texture extractor doesn't work and ground handling doesn't work. And I will check other plugins as well, and I will let you know what works and what doesn't work. But that was to be expected, so I'm not surprised. Yeah, I'm actually surprised how many things do work and have already been adapted, at least according to what I read. So, yeah, Vulkan and X-Plane 1150, way to go. Great. So, I'm really happy with it. Yeah. Okay, that's it. Follow-ups will come with individual add-ons and so on, and I will also do the one or the other try and fly again, just to see what the differences are, and maybe also discover some problems that you may or may not have. I heard of some problems, for example, the flight factor 777 doesn't seem to work properly in 1150 and Vulkan, so I'm going to follow this up because I also have this aircraft, and I will let you know if I discover things like that. Thanks for watching. Until next time.